put slideshow. Oh, wait, sharing my screen. Share screen. Okay, you should see my screen, right?
Yes.
So hi everybody, and welcome to the Sunday Bespoke webinars sessions. Today's session is on diversity and inclusion, and we're going to talk with Rhonda Roberts about things like race, gender, and dance in history, about the experience of being a minority dancer and performer, and about holistic education methods, that encourage inclusivity and diversity in schools and dance classrooms. Finally, we'll have a little chat if we have time about the BIPOC activity in Healthy Dancer Canada, and discuss any of the topics that come up for us in this session. So to begin, I'm going to introduce Rhonda, who was the committee member and the chair of the HDC BIPOC committee. She's a conditioning trainer at TAB, and then she's going to tell us about herself a little bit more now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rhonda Roberts, and I am the owner and creator of TAB Fitness. But I am also a mom of a dancer. I was a professional dancer for very many years. And it's a pleasure for me to be here to talk a little bit more about race and gender and inclusivity in the dance studio. I think for myself, this has always been a walk that I've walked my whole life. It's only until recently, I think, that other people have really been able to understand or even gauge what it might be like to be a person of color or somebody from the BIPOC community in a room, in an environment that has been catered to or developed in and around white people, and what that means as you're trying to be a part of that. And what it means is you try to navigate your face in that space. And so I hope that David and I can have a good conversation to, for one, bring more understanding to the topic. For two, to talk about how we might be able to change some of the things and practices that we have in our studios, but more importantly, for us to share information and to grow. I think that's the most important thing. My purpose here is not to sit and say, like, this is what's happened and, shame, blame. Hopefully my goal here is to just bring light to some things that maybe people haven't thought about before, and then how to maybe apply some tools or some strategies in a different way to help bridge that gap and to make things better.
Perfect. What happened to me? Oh, I'm still here. I'm still getting used to this structure.
It's all good.
All right, so I'm just going to share my screen one more time to begin our discussion of the historical roots of race in the dance classroom and in performance. So here we go. So can you see that, Rhonda?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. So basically, I want to start with the styles, for example, like burlesque, ballet, and ballroom. In particular, the history of burlesque, for instance, speaks of the struggle of the Black people in America to gain some kind of a legitimacy in the arts and in dance in particular. As a practice in itself, I will recommend, there's a book that I've read not recently, but during my studies, that speaks about the work and the life of Black burlesque dancers in those cabarets, and how white elite, I would say, audiences would come and would watch. They would, it would be an experience for them to come into those clubs that were not considered to be of polite society, and watch these black dancers perform. It was also a very sexual performance at that time, and it still is in many ways. So both engage in this voyeurism of race and sexuality, and yet how these performers, still remained in with some integrity, and they regained some of the power through being the performer and being the watched, and performing their own powers through the dances, through the movements, and realigning the dynamic even within that non-equal situation. Similarly, in ballroom, the history of colonialism has been already written about by Juliet McMains and others. But just to remind that ballroom as a practice comes from white dance masters going to Latin American countries and appropriating the dances that they had into their own system, changing the names, changing even the movements, gestures, sort of polishing it or whitewashing it, however you want to put it, and then developing a system around that in combination with some of their own dances. Although, honestly, I only know of the waltz as being truly European dance, and that also, might have its own roots elsewhere. But even dances like the foxtrot, the quick step, that are supposedly the hallmark of the civil society in the US and Europe, are actually also coming from slave dances, imitating their masters, right? And for that, there's a good book by Danielle Robinson that talks about the history of those dances, the ragtime dances that gave birth to foxtrot. And then finally, just to add one more style, we have ballet, which traditionally symbolized the values of the West, the values of Europe, both religious and secular, in how they would portray the fairies and the gods, and the movements being light and airy would represent the values of this society. So in many ways, it also, through colonialism, through other, let's say, the mediated forces through trading, and it became the hallmark of dance in general. So when people think dance in the West, they still think ballet a lot of the time, unless they know more about dance than just that, which is slowly changing, but it's mainly changing in the academic circles, perhaps in the dance circles. But a lot of the, let's say, the common people that don't know much about this topic, they still think of ballet as the epithet of dance. And some of the ways to destabilize that I have seen is to bring in more other styles into the schools, into the universities, into the conservatories. Of course, jazz did a lot of influence in that area, as did the African dances and so on. And also, I think the inclusion of Black ballet dancers in the companies, or the traditional ballet companies, has changed the perspective of the body itself, because the body itself was very much idealized around the European ideal of what a body should be, which then fitted the gestures and fitted the history of that narrative of, either the European villages or the religious symbolism in the choreographies. And yeah, and the Black dancers being in those companies, I feel, destabilized that as well, and gave a new perspective to a tradition that was originally very much Euro-American one. I think I'll stop here, and I'll just let Rhonda speak to some of those topics.
There was just so many things that you were discussing that I wanted to tried to write down some of the things that you were talking, but let's just go back first to, you mentioned dances that were utilized, or that that sort of were the beginnings of dances like foxtrot. Um, I want to go back to something called the cakewalk, which is one particular dance that I'm sure you probably already mentioned, where it was a dance that basically what would happen was the slaves would um, perform a set of dances to sort of poke fun. It was their fun time to poke fun at the slave masters, and put on their fanciest dresses and parade around as they would see their masters do. And it was something that I feel in these days we would call it basically letting off some steam, considering the dire situation that my ancestors were in. And what ended up happening was the slave masters basically got wind of this, and then they had competitions. So then they would take, their best couple from whatever plantation, and then they would have this sort of competition between the different slaves, and whoever were basically the most entertaining would be awarded a cake. And so this is sort of the development of what is known as the cakewalk, which then also sort of parlayed itself into other dances like the Charleston. Um, we often picture, white flapper girls in the 20s doing the Charleston, and that dance also too was appropriated, as well as other dances that we find in swing, like the Lindy Hop. Um, that was also coming right out of those clubs in the Harlem Renaissance era. The idea of burlesque, the only person I think of when I think of that is Josephine Baker, and she literally um, took a powerless moment and made it powerful. I've read her documentary, how she literally parlayed that into a career and then moved to Paris and was quite successful as a burlesque dancer. There are many theories on, how that also developed the sort of voyeuristic look on Black women and how Black women are perceived. But that is a whole other topic that will take us to somewhere else, which I don't want to go to. So I'm going to stick to the dance. Um, but I think that we have to start to look at dances like tap, for instance, jazz, and those origins, and how somehow we've erased the origin and made it into something different. We were talking earlier about tap dance and that the origin of tap dance, and how it is this sort of a combination of African step dance, um, Black American dance, and the Irish jig, and it's all combined, and to get it's combined together to create this amazing art form, which we know as tap dance, which is just true American art form built from basically colonialism. Um, we think of that, and I think it's really important to do the work and to look back into history and really see the development of these dances that we know today. Whenever I'm in situations and I'm with young people, when I ask them about Sandman Sam and the Nicholas Brothers and other great artists. Sorry, you can hear my dog in the background, um, and other great artists. Um, I am I'm really surprised that their only reference to tap would be somebody like Fred Astaire, um, because a lot of that movement was created way before then. Another thing that you touched on really quickly was ballet. And ballet is really going through transformation right now, and in a very big way. I think that there is a recognition of how elitist it has become, how it has completely ignored certain bodies and body types. Uh, and I feel like right now we are in this really unique position to grow and learn from our past. And so I think it is really important when we're talking about ballet that we have to look at ballet and how it's structured. It is patriarchal in its messaging. It is elitist and it is racist, right? Because there are like many characters that are placed in ballets that were done in blackface or in yellowface. Um, and I think that part of what is happening now is that there's a recognition of the fact that we've accepted as a society that that's just tradition. And we're now, I feel like there are people that are owning that and saying that, yeah, it was tradition, but tradition was based on something that was pretty horrific for certain groups of people. So, in order for ballet to stay relevant, we need to adapt and start changing how we are presenting our traditional ballets and how we are um, creating our companies. So there's been a lot of discussion in the dance world about how do we go about making this better for everyone. And I'm really glad about that because my daughter is a ballet dancer. And so I feel like I, there should be more opportunities for dancers of color in these settings that are more traditional. And it's not going to happen overnight. I'm aware of that. But I do see that there is a push to make this happen. And I'm just really glad that that's happening. Um, there were Black ballet dancers and brown ballet dancers well before Misty Copeland, which is the one that is the most popular. But I feel that what Misty Copeland did was she opened a door to allow other dancers to start to push their way through. And we are now starting to see more presence of brown and Black bodies on stages slowly, but it's starting to happen. And I think that as we start to see these changes happening, there's going to be some pushback, and people are not going to be very accepting to some of those changes. But I feel like it's really important that we strive to make that difference because society is changing and we all need to adapt to those changes in many ways. Um, and so that's what I wanted to really say about ballet because it is a very tough topic, and um, I'm just, I am hopeful that there's going to be changes made and opportunities given, and that we're not going to fall back into old habits because we get tired of having these discussions, which sometimes happens too. There's other things, something else that you had mentioned, and I'm trying to go back to what you're saying when we were talking about bodies in general in dance and the changes that we're starting to see in the look of those bodies and how they were based on a very European standard. The issue with that is that it didn't happen necessarily to male Black bodies, which I find interesting, right? And someone once explained it to me as that all falls into the idea of the patriarchy and what we expect to see from our male dancers, that strong, muscular um, body, which you'll find on many male Black dancers. But then what we expect from our female dancers is this slight, vulnerable, um, needed to be rescued idea. And you don't think of I can only speak from a Black woman's perspective. From a Black woman, you don't expect that from a Black woman. You don't believe there's going to be a Black woman who can appear to be vulnerable and, needing to be rescued. And so the idea of seeing that slight, sort of a blonde, vulnerable woman is the image that we projected on stages and has been projected and maintained for many, many, many years. I think what's starting to happen now is we are able to see women, all kinds of women, in different ways. And then also the stories that we are starting to tell on stages are also changing. So we're able to find more interesting stories to have different kinds of women playing. I think, again, that as we go into the future with our new dancers of the future and choreographers of the future, that we will continue to see these changes. And again, I am hopeful that people will be more creative in the choices that they are making when it comes to women and how we are presented on stage. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Can I talk a little bit about my experience on stage?
Sure, sure.
So I heard this once, and I've actually seen ideas about this, about how Black dancers are presented on stage. And there's this three sort of categories that there was. There is the woman, which we know as the mammy, right? The mom character, the sort of, I would say, like, this was somebody like a Maya Angelou, or somebody really wise like Oprah Winfrey, or that woman that is comforting and caring for your children. And so that's one image that is often projected with the Black woman. Then there's the what I would like to call like the Jezebel, or the, sort of like the prostitute, or the sort of like the hip hop dancer in the background. You mentioned the burlesque dancer, the very sexual, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with women being sexual, but that is also another image that has been projected. And then lastly, there would be like the angry Black woman, the, you know, I'm going to tell you this, that image has also been another image that Black women have been used for, and on stages and in film and TV. And I sadly have to admit that I've been all three of those characters. And and I can give you examples. When I worked at Stratford, I played, um, in Guys and Dolls, I played the girl who was stealing the man from the main character. I was it was called the Havana lady. So, and of course, I was the only Black dancer in the show. So I played the Havana lady. And then in the other show, I played um, an angel, but we weren't angels. We were really these like sort of hot, the hot angels in the show. And yes, I had to wear a blonde wig, but we'll talk about that later. Um, and then in another show, Lion King, I played Shenzi, which is the leader, the main hyena, who's got attitude. And so that would be like the sort of angry Black woman, well, Bonsai, what we got here? That kind of idea. And then in another show, I played that sort of, I can't remember what particular show it was, but I was playing again, sort of not really the mammy character, but the mom and the caring, sort of wise one in the room. Um, and when I look back at my performing career, I can honestly say I played the Jezebel character, the hot, sexy, more than one time. And it was kind of because of that, um, that I was like, I think I'm done. and I'm ready to retire, um, because that was the only thing that was coming my way. And it has a lot to do with what you present, or what people feel you present, and who's deciding what you are presenting in the room. And so that's what I think happened with me and with my career. And so I was kind of like, I'm done. I'm done. This was well before the social awakening that happened in the last few years. Um, and I was always the only Black dancer in the room. I have many colleagues who are extremely talented who are from the BIPOC community, who I never worked with until Lion King, because we would never be hired for the same show. I have Asian friends who also have been in situations where they have not been in the same show together, or where they have been told they can't work in the same show with another Asian girl because they already have one. This was like common practice. And I'm sure people have heard many, many stories about this. So, my whole point in having this conversation is not to dredge it up again, but is to have people think about how can we do this better and differently, um, which is one of the reasons why I joined the BIPOC advocacy working group at Healthy Dancer Canada. It was because I really wanted to try to make a positive difference in how we are providing opportunity for dancers from the BIPOC group, how we are presenting um, the dancers and artists from the BIPOC working group, and how we can provide more opportunity to allow for uh, their work to be showcased, for choreographers to have more opportunities to bring their work to the forefront. So, like, as you were saying, in the Western world, when we think about dance, we think about ballet, that we might be interested in seeing work from other cultures, other cultural groups, and also seeing different bodies move in in the ways that we are not expecting, or we've not experienced before. So that was the development of that group. Of course, came out of what happened during the whole awful George Floyd moment that we had as a world. We began to wake up and notice what was happening. But from that horrible moment, I believe, stemmed this amazing social awakening that has allowed for especially the dance community to wake up and see where we have gone wrong and what we can do to change it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's some very good points. I mean, like I haven't really thought, to be honest, from what you mentioned about the theater and being the male body versus the female body changing only, and I mean it's true that the BIPOC community has not had even professionally the opportunity to to get the same roles and so on. I feel like very often in the academia we discuss all these things, but it's almost like we neglect the economics of it. The on the ground situations, right? Like I that's not my main area of research, but in my case, for instance, I had immigrants from the Soviet Union,
Mhm.
and I've tried to do some sort of some emancipatory work with them, so help them write grants, help them kind of use the government and the place, to improve the businesses, their conditions, and so on, because it it has become, just as an example, like it has become a business that is very privatized simply because they knew no other way.
Mhm.
um, and when something becomes very privatized, it also changes things and it shifts things, let's say. But anyway, to get back to the point, is that, in the same way, I feel like this is how realistically, like this these issues that stem from historical roots, that come from our like bias, or the things that we view as simple status quo, become real. It's just, let's say you can't get any role that is beyond what you stereotype as, or
Mhm.
maybe you're not getting as many roles as like somebody who fits the mold for most of the shows that are looked for, you know.
Yeah, well, I think that when you think about who's making the decisions in a ballet company, um, in a musical, you are surrounded by your network of people. And often, if in your own life, your network of people tends to stay pretty linear, right?
Mm,
There tends to be only a certain group of people that you're surrounded by. The people that you bring into network of that network of people stays the same. And so it's like you have to cast a broader net. And I think that's what people started to realize they were not doing, that they're that they were making decisions all based on, like you were saying, the biases that they kept, or what they believe to be true about what would look good in this situation and what doesn't look good. You know, what bodies will be acceptable to see in this way and what bodies aren't. And I feel as you open up the network of people that are making those decisions, then you start to see different things happening on stages. You start to see people being more creative with their choices and realizing that what they were presenting on those stages, it's not realistically what's really happening in society. And so for ballet specifically, if there isn't a change, it'll become irrelevant. That form and that style of dance, people aren't going to want to come and see it because it's not speaking to anybody anymore. So
mm,
that's why it's more important. And the same with musicals. Like, we're developing musicals that are relevant and more interesting to people in this time. Look at Hamilton. Hamilton is a perfect example. It's a hip hop musical, right? Based on something historical. But what it did was it brought this whole new generation of people to the theater. And that's what we have to do as artists. We are striving to keep our work relevant. Ballet still needs to come to the table and become more relevant so that people are investing their time and their money into the art form. And you can see that happening in contemporary ballet to an extent. But with our classical ballet work, I feel like there's still room to grow. And I do know that they are growing, and that that we're still trying to find ways to change that so that it does stay relevant, so that people do want to go and see it, and so that people do still want to dance in the genre. Uh, there are many Black ballet dancers of color that I have had the experience of speaking to, or that I have read in the recent years of their struggles working up the ranks in the company, or being told to wear lighter makeup, or not giving, like you're saying, not being given those principal opportunities just because we've traditionally said that it's not what we've done in the past. I feel that that is changed in the way that we are now calling the bluff, right? As far as people that are in the industry, and dancers that are working, they're now standing up and saying, okay, that's how it was before, but we need to now step up and do something different. And I feel that those bigger changes will happen in companies when there's more of a reflection of BIPOC individuals in some of those places making some of those decisions. Because what their eye might look for may be something different than what people who have these, or who are in positions of making these decisions right now, are looking for. I'm not saying in all cases this is going to happen, but I do think the more variety you have in places of power, the more you will be able to have an active conversation about what you can do to change it. Not just having one person kind of sprinkled in and amongst the group to say, yes, we've covered all of our bases here. But having more different people having this same conversation. Like you and I are having this conversation right now, but what would work better is if we had a bunch of different people from different backgrounds having this same discussion, and that I'm not speaking for somebody that is Asian or that is South Asian or that is Indigenous, that because I can only talk from my own personal background and how it has affected me as an artist and how it has affected people that I know that look like me. But what I find more interesting is when I'm speaking to somebody who's coming from a European background and we are having an open, honest discussion about what we need to look at. Why Lion King isn't, when Lion King happened, that wasn't like, way we made it because we had a show of all Black people. Like, it's like, no, that was one little show amongst a whole bunch of shows that happen on a regular basis. Why in ballet? Why having Misty Copeland rise to the position that she did is not really saying that ballet has changed, when you can walk into theater at any day and notice that there's still only like one or two brown people in a cast of 30, right? This tells you that things are not changing as quickly as maybe I would like. But I am appreciative that there is conversation and that conversation is now starting to lead to effective change. And yeah, that's what's so brilliant about these types of conversations. I think that in time, I would like to not have to have this conversation. In time, I would like to just be saying, okay, so who are we hiring? What would be like that? We're not thinking about like, do we have enough of this, or should we add more of this type of person? That it's a not like that we're just looking at talent and having the discussion about talent and how can we bring more interesting talent to the table, and that it's not a game of trying to have the equity in the room, but at this stage of the game, we do have to have these conversations because it's not happening as much as we would like it to
I agree. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this as one of the topics. I think that, every little step counts,
happen. I wanted to actually also, because sometimes it's not relatable when people are hearing about professionals talk about what's going on in the industry and how my professional career and what happened when I worked at these prestigious theaters, how it affected me. I want to bring it down to something a little bit more applicable to our dance studios and how these biases can begin in these particular spaces. And I want to give a perfect example of how simple it is and how maybe if a dance teacher was watching or listening, um, how they might want to apply some of these things that I've talked about inclusivity.
Do you want me maybe to just give a little intro to the holistic education and then you can start? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was going to go there anyway. So,
yeah.
Okay. So classroom. So holistic education and cognitive behavior therapy. In some of my research, together with Nicole Hamilton, actually, we've made a talk for the Royal Academy of Dance on those topics, and she was discussing holistic education and how basically it brings the individual up to the front and accepts and develops inclusivity rather than simply goals or other pursuits that are outside of ourselves. It tends to foster autonomy and confidence through the enabling of creative expression and inclusive approach to learning, which especially is prevalent in North American schools, or at least as a theory. You know, I mean, we all know reality sometimes is different, but it's something that has been born out of multicultural societies and tends to allow for a lot more inclusion and diversity than the traditional authoritarian methods. And in our research, this has brought us to motivational climates. So in the dance studio, there was also some psychological research done on dance studios, mainly in England, but some in the US as well. And we looked at what an ego-based authoritarian climate, which is externally motivated and guilt-driven, usually the traditional way of teaching dance, was doing versus an autonomy-based and holistic-based education, which was collaborative and internally motivated. And again, that one allowed for a lot more inclusive feelings, a lot more acceptance of skills, background, and ability beyond others. And it allowed for every student to thrive more. Even in my own experience, when I was teaching differently abled people, allowing for that inclusion, you know, developing classes that facilitated either an ability to move for those who didn't think they could, or an ability, let's say, for racially excluded populations normally from a style to try out styles that they wouldn't otherwise do. Like even ironically, Latinos doing ballroom Latin dancing and being given the freedom to speak about how they feel about it was something that was special. And finally, the inclusive classrooms, as with the Pierre Dulaine programs in the dancing classrooms, allowed for the children in those diverse classrooms to use dance as an equalizer and as a way to communicate beyond race, let's say. So I'll leave it on this note, and Rhonda can continue discussing her actual experience in the classroom. I just wanted to give that introduction.
That's great. So there are a couple of things that really stood out to me when you were talking about the student. One was the well-being of the student and not leaving anyone behind. And so I wanted to think about how do we apply that to our BIPOC students. In so many cases, when you are walking into a studio that is not really a professional dance studio, but just a recreational based studio that maybe even has a competitive program, there's an expectation that all students are going to be treated in the same way. This doesn't necessarily happen, and it's not intentional. I guarantee it's not intentional, but there's small things that happen where dancers, especially dancers of color, are sometimes left behind. And this seems like such a small thing, but the well-being of students in certain classes. So we were talking earlier about bodies. And when we're in dance studios, we know that European and African bodies look different. And so when you're in classes like ballet, modern, or jazz, sometimes teachers unintentionally can make a student color feel uncomfortable by presenting costuming that does not flatter skin tone or help them feel good about their bodies in a room. And it's often not, it's done, of course, not with the thought of trying to make them feel uncomfortable, but it happens. And I'll give you a perfect example. I'm an adjudicator, so I go and I watch dance competitions and I give them a mark and judge them and give them commentary and feedback and hopefully motivation and mentorship. And I can't tell you how many times I've watched young Black dancers in a competitive number, being the only one on the stage with all the other girls are either white or Asian, and they are wearing tights the exact same color as the girls that are white. And often those girls tend to feel uncomfortable telling their teachers that this doesn't look good on me, because they're often met with, well, it's about the line and it's about creating a uniformed appearance on stage. But what they're missing, the point that they're missing is that that child does not look like the other girls on stage. And actually, none of those girls look the same. The idea of the uniformity and saying that this person of color should have to sort of sacrifice how they feel and their identity in order to make this number uniform, I feel is an outdated practice. And it's one way that can harm the well-being of a student in a room. Another way is hair. So hair is a very, I don't want to say complicated, but a very deep subject for Black women. And I've, on more than one occasion, my own daughter included, have been forced to do things with hair that is not comfortable, not practical, not necessary. And I was recently at a competition where I watched this lovely little Black girl with her beautiful fro curly hair in a solo number, and she had her own hair out. And then when she was in another number with other girls, they covered her hair by putting on a straight ponytail over top of her natural, beautiful tight curls. And I made a comment about it. And I said, you don't need to hide your curls. You need to rock your curls. We are in a different time. And I did not mean to make the teacher that made that decision feel bad. But what I wanted her to understand was that as a teacher, it is our responsibility to make children feel comfortable in the space and not feel like they need to hide that aspect of themselves in a space without intentionally making that child feel like that. She did. And that is where in these spaces, we have to take ownership of things like this. How do we make our students in this community, in the BIPOC community, feel like they belong? Another example perfectly that I'm going to give is when I was at a dance studio with my daughter, I asked the person at the front desk if I could buy some tights for her, where she proceeded to say, she handed me the beige tights, and I said, no, this is not going to work. Do you have another shade that I can use for my daughter? She said, well, if you want to get that, you're going to have to go basically across town and buy it there. And I politely said, I'm looking around this room right now, and I can see a whole room of children that look like my daughter. Don't you think it would be in your best interest to invest in their tights and their shoes and their bodysuits in the same way that you've invested in everyone else? Because what you say when you have all of these different sort of material things in your space already, costumes and tights and shoes, and you have it available for parents, you're saying, we have it all here. You don't have to look any further. We've got you. We're supporting you and your child's dance journey. And what that felt like to me was that we're supporting their journey, but your journey, you're going to have to go and find it somewhere and find it somewhere else in order to be here. This is another example of how, as a studio owner, you can support those children who are coming to you to learn. in a way that is positive, and to show that you care and that you are invested in their dance journey and growth as well. So that was just one of the things that I thought that stood out, because that's what leaves a child behind. That's what takes away a child's confidence in a room, when they don't feel like you got them, that you see them, that you know they need something that's maybe a little bit different. And it does take more effort. And I know that I've heard people say, well, I don't have the time to go and buy a whole bunch of different tights and shoes. Well, if you're investing in a child's life and that child is coming to your studio, I would feel that you would want to invest in that, because it's our job. It's our job to take that extra time. And so uh, I think that that's one of the things that I most definitely would encourage when we're talking about a holistic approach to that child. That holistic approach is, it includes what they look like as well, because that's going to sort of set up how they feel about themselves, and how they feel about being in that room, and how much space they take up in that room, you know. So that's why those are the two big things that I wrote down that really stood out to me. And for so many people, they do not know the impact of those small little details, how much it impacts a child in a room, especially if the child is in the room and they're the only one, because they don't want to stand out. They will wear the pink tights, they will wear the pink ballet tights, because they don't want to feel different. um, they don't want to draw any attention to themselves, and they don't want to make a big deal about how they're feeling in the room at that time. So that was one big thing that I would say, if we were thinking about a holistic practice, that we want to think about the whole student. And that means um, where they're coming from, not just socioeconomic, but their cultural background as well.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. I think there was a lot of material there to unpack. I think it's time to come to an end here. Let's see if did Trisha wanna have any questions? She joined us at the end, but
Oh,
we started at 3, Trisha. But did you have any questions before we kind of come towards the end here?
no, sorry about that. I got the time. I'm in a different time zone, so I didn't realize. Next time I'll be on time. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. We'll send out the recording, so you'll be able to get
Oh,
it.
wonderful. Thank you so much.
To end this, I'm gonna thank Rhonda for being here. It's been really insightful and pleasant to chat about those things, and yeah, and to chat in a very sort of a overarching manner about difficult things. You know, I appreciate that a lot. Furthermore, I wanted to give some information about where you can find us. So I will share my screen here. That's not the right share. 1 second.
While you're looking for that, I just
Yeah.
want to really just say I appreciate the opportunity to just come and talk to everyone about diversity in the dance studio, and also why it's important to really think um, about the impacts of um, of race. And we didn't really talk a lot about gender, but we did a little bit when we talked about the patriarchy in dance. Um, but to really kind of think about the impact of of all of this on the next generation of artists that we're developing, and how we can really change to make it better. Because I feel like my career helped to hopefully pave the road for another person of color that is going to walk in the same steps that I did. I'm hoping that their steps will be easier. And I know somebody walked before me to make my steps easy. So um, that's all I really wanted to say about that, was that I really hope that this is insightful, and also that we can have another discussion sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Andrea was inviting me to do something for the conference for the Healthy Dancer Canada that's coming up. So maybe we can have a discussion then. And speaking of which, so this is some of the information where you can reach us. My website is utevsky.com, where you can find several workshops, courses, and just general information about what I do and when and how. Then my page is bespoke / dance I do. And Rhonda runs Tab Fitness. I don't know if you have a website, Rhonda, but
Yes, I do.
let me rewrite it.
www.tabfitness.ca.
Okay. Oh, there we go. There we go.
There I am.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the Healthy Dancer Canada is the one I just showed previously. So you can reach them for all kinds of questions about dancers' health, well-being, and anything to do with the several topics that we've been discussing as well. Besides that, I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to give us some donations as well for the next series, feel free. We sent the PayPal link outside of that. But either way, we're happy to have all of you, and reach out if there's anything more. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, Rhonda. So let me just stop the recording.